Hello, everyone. Corey Whitney, and I'll be speaking with you today, a talk called Beyond Metrics. I'm putting on my human ecologist hat today, and I'll talk to you a little bit about epistemology and ontologies and values in agroecology research. So our discussion today revolves around agroecology and the thoughts on while we agree on agroecology, we disagree in a lot of ways about how to implement it and what it means. And the answers to these conundrums or these disagreements relies not on data, or the answers not in data, but in the unseen layers of how we define knowledge, reality, and what good decisions even mean. I think from this talk, natural scientists are going to get some rigor on epistemology and ontology, framed as why we disagree on evidence, and economists can see the critique of rational choice theory. I'll offer some paradoxes, punchy contrasts, hopefully not too controversial, and offer you some real world case studies. Again, as a human ecologist, I'm going to center this on marginalized knowledge systems without dismissing all the quantitative tools that's important to our work. So we'll talk again, ontologies about what is agriculture, and epistemologies. So how do we know these things, the things that we know? How do we learn? And I'll try to make the case that every decision is value-laden, and we should make sure to include that in our research approaches. And ultimately, my talk today is a call for collaboration. I want to get your inputs into the work that I do, and I'd like to collaborate with you on your work, especially interested in probabilistic modeling approaches like Monte Carlo and Bayesian, but also post-hoc analyses for complex systems like Pareto front analysis and game theory optimality for decision-making. So there's going to be some esoteric stuff in the talk, and just a really good reference for that is the Cusworth paper. I can share that with you, or you can find it in Frontiers in Agronomy. They do a good job overviewing a lot of these social science terms and how they apply for agroecology research. First, on what is agriculture, and then ontologies related to our research. So not to create too dichotomous a story here, but just as a general outline, I think in dominant ontologies, we see nature as external and passive, whereas in the agroecology worldview, we see nature as an active and relational system. In terms of defining farms and the scale of our research, the purpose of our research, or sort of the system that we're researching, we often, in dominant ontologies in science, we look at it as an economic unit or input-output type logic related to farms. Whereas in the agroecology worldview, of course, it's much more complex and adaptive and socioecological, like systems-based type of thing. And really important here is negotiating reality. So when we talk about why we're researching or what our research is really about, we may have different ideas ontologically about what is a successful system, or what kind of models would we like to produce. And so it can be a clash between agroecology as kind of a set of practices versus the holistic view of agroecology as a relational system. Just for more background on this dichotomy, or sort of some of the critiques of objective decision-making, I refer you to Latour's work and also to Harding's standpoint theory. So epistemology, of course, is the study of knowledge and what counts as valid knowledge and who is recognized as a legitimate knower. So in conventional epistemology, again, not to create too dichotomous a story here, but just to clarify some of the nuances, in conventional epistemology, in sciences, we're quite reliant on technical knowledge, whereas in agroecology, we're more interested in plural knowledge systems. Often in the conventional epistemology, we may be thinking about expert-led quantitative models, but also linear knowledge transfer processes, whereas in the agroecological epistemology, we're looking at farmer-led initiatives, experiential processes, intuitive thoughts and ideas, and co-creation and iteration. And it's often the case that in conventional epistemologies, we're thinking about authority, we're authority-centered. We like to think of knowledge holders and experts as those who have some kind of credentials. And in the agroecological epistemology, we're looking more at shared authority situated perspectives, and also thinking about lived experiences as a situated perspective, lived experience as a valid expertise. Indigenous professors, as my teacher used to say in Vietnam. So every decision is value laden. That's the next part I want to talk about here. We'll talk here about utility maximization versus plural values, dignity, sacredness of land and agroecology, for example. So in order to guide our research, we need to first identify the values. These values are the foundational part of the kind of research approaches and the work that we're doing. And these can be the foundation for the kinds of research choices and decision-making frameworks that we apply. And ultimately, depending on how these work out, depending on how we put these together, it can lead to different types of outcomes of our work in regards to outcome policy practices and also empowering communities. Science is often portrayed as neutral, but in reality, we know it's shaped by values explicitly or implicitly, again, referring you to the Latour work. And there are values that guide agroecological transitions or ecological, all the transitions. Again, looking at Harding's work might be useful in thinking more about this point. And there are lots of competing interests when we're doing work in agriculture. And we can think, for example, about agribusiness versus smallholders and different value systems there. And decision-making integrates both subjective and objective knowledge. And I think that's really useful when we're thinking about how to do our research. And decision-making can become a space where scientific evidence and lived experiences can intersect and have a more inclusive, ethical, and effective transition process. So bridging to practice very briefly. We presented some work a little while ago. Hasn't received a lot of attention yet, but I think it probably will. We outlined the conceptual relationships between decision analysis methods in agroecology. So we look at decision theory for supporting decision-making in agroecology and thinking about how intended outcomes, based on those outcomes, we can explicitly account for risks and uncertainty using decision modeling approaches. So there's agroecology as this Venn diagram of practice, science, and social movement. It is all of those things from different perspectives, and how decision theory can support and can be applied for supporting decision-making for agroecology interventions. In regards to applying holistic models and considering these epistemologies and ontologies for modeling in reality, we worked on an adoption process. So here's an example of a multi-stage adoption process of agroforestry. And we identify the web of factors influencing farmers' decisions in this process and look for emergence, these socioeconomic practices and factors that shape farmers' attitudes and intentions. So it can be really useful having this holistic perspective and using farmers' inputs to try to understand complex processes. And similarly, we apply methods, modeling approaches that include these epistemological, ontological perspectives in working on intervention. Sorry, you can't see that upper model, but here we're working with applying these holistic modeling approaches for looking at the socioecological impacts of e-flows. And we build a conceptual impact pathway and then operationalize it to build quantitative models to account for smallholder farmer water use. And we're able to forecast outcomes on river flow conditions. This is in the Letaba, Greater Letaba region, South Africa. So what can we do now based on what we've learned? So I think what we'd like to do is to update maybe some of our ontologies and just consider what's valid there. Also diversify epistemologies and make sure we're gathering all sorts of knowledge and finding ways to integrate that into our modeling approaches. we should consider values as we put these things together and make sure that that we understand that it is, whether we have acknowledged it or not, or just acknowledge what those values are at the center of our modeling approaches. And I'd like to reach out. Of course, this talk was mainly just to try to reach out and get some more collaboration. So I'd like to update some of the probabilistic modeling approaches that we're applying for this and finding ways to operationalize conceptual understandings and deeper understandings of how complex systems work. And some of the post-hoc analyses that are being applied could be updated, could be, I'd like to see a flowering there of, for example, the different types of Pareto front analyses and looking at ways to generate game theory optimality into the post-hoc analyses of modeling approaches for these complex systems. We've been writing about this for a while, so some of the foundational reports for decision theoretical approaches in agricultural development are in papers that we've written for the World Agroforestry, as well as other organizations, and all the scripts that we're writing. So the ways that we operationalize these things are being published in GitHub and other sources, and you can find these here. Thank you.